In 1914, when the First World War began, the world into which modern art was born had begun to vanish. The joyful sense of possibility that was born of the machine was now cut down by other machines. Above all, what the war produced in its survivors and onlookers was a longing for a clean slate, a sense of spiritual apocalypse. In return, they would be pacifists, internationalists. They would get out of the war if possible, but to where? The closest neutral country was Switzerland. Zurich attracted every sort of intellectual refugee from Northern Europe, great ones like Lenin and James Joyce, but a host of others. They had fled their natural homelands, but they had a cultural one, the cafe. Places like this one, the Odeon in Zurich, were cultural institutions. They were, in an almost literal sense, mediums of discourse, like magazines. People who are separated from the patterns of their society, whether by choice or not, still need a forum. They need a place where they can go to meet and drink and talk, preen themselves, or simply sit alone with a book. They say that sex is the poor man's opera, but the cafe was the opera of the dissenters. It was also the marketplace of ideas for exiles. And modernism was very much the creation of exiles, whether you're talking about Picasso, the Spaniard, or Joyce and Beckett, the Irishman. In the cafes of Europe, the intellectuals got their sense of being a class, the mandarins of change. When Stalin declared war against what he called rootless cosmopolitans in the 30s, he was, in effect, attacking the Odeons and those who sat in them. But even so, the revolution that brought him to power was partly hatched in this very room by Lenin, who was a regular at the Odeon in 1916. Among the other denizens of the Odeon were a Romanian poet named Tristan Tzara, a painter named Marcel Janco, a sculptor from Alsace, Jean Arp, and a German writer named Hugo Ball. It was Ball who decided to start a cultural cabaret, a club where they could all perform and read their work and show their paintings. He rented the ground floor of a building in the Spiegelgasse and called it the Café Voltaire, and here a movement was born. Its name was Dada. A nonsense name. Dada meant yes, yes in Russian. It meant a rocking horse in Romanian. In any language, it was one of the child's first utterances. The word Dada signified the desire to go back to scratch, the impossible project of starting culture all over again from the beginning, uncontaminated by the language of the elders. Marcel Janco made theatre masks for the evenings at the Café Voltaire. Gaudy, primitive things run up with cardboard and poster paint. Hugo Ball conducted mock rituals on the café stage in costume and gibberish. The strongest influence on the Dadaists in Zurich was Futurism. In Italy, before the war, Marinetti had already shown how to grab an audience with manifestos and stunts. His idea of a gratuitous art at the end of history, whose full stop had been written by the machine and the Great War, was what Dada adopted along with the full range of publicity tricks. Provocation was the essential business of Dada, its claim to modernity. It was art's parody of revolution. But Futurism wanted to abolish the past in the name of the machine, whereas the Dadaists wanted to produce an innocence whose metaphor was childhood.
We searched for an elementary art that would, we thought, save mankind from the furious madness of these times. We wanted an anonymous and collective art.
Arp offended all the conventions of sculpture by making simple jigsaw reliefs of brightly painted wood, almost toy-like. And he used chance by tearing out scraps of paper and dropping them at random onto a sheet, gluing them down in the pattern that they fell in. These simple experiments gave the lingering impression that the Dadas were against art itself. Now, it's true that in the years before 1920, not only in Zurich, but also in Paris and New York, there were some very pointed jabs at the cult of art and its priests, the dealers and critics. Especially they came from Marcel Duchamp, and the best known of them was his moustache on the Mona Lisa, not only a jab at the middlebrow worship of the artist as divine creator, but also a pun on Leonardo's own homosexuality.
Gioconda was another thing that I made here in Paris in 1919 before going back to America. And, well, it was one of these gestures because I added a little moustache and a little goatee and also wrote underneath something very risky.
The letters, pronounced as the French pronounce them, mean she's got a hot ass. Then there was Duchamp's urinal, which he exhibited as a fountain and signed R. Mutt.
When I sent that urinal to be shown, is one incident. The jury, there was no jury, but the people who were organizing it decided it couldn't be shown, that urinal. So instead of, they didn't know it was I was concerned with it because I didn't sign my name, as you know, the Mutt name instead. So they just took the thing and threw it away above the partition.
Like his bottle rack and bicycle wheel and other ready-mades, it said, in effect, that the world was so full of interesting objects that the artist need not add to them. Instead, he could just pick one, and this ironic act of choice was equivalent to creation. When Dada moved to Berlin after the end of the war, it took a very different form. In Switzerland, it had been jokey and lyrical. It exalted innocence and chance. It was an alternative to conflict, but not in post-war Berlin. To be modern here meant to be engaged in a theatre of politics in a city torn by shortages and every other kind of post-war misery as the left battled the centre and the right for possession of the streets. And it was generally felt that an artist who spent his time pulling words out of a hat at random or dropping little pieces of torn paper on a table in accordance with the laws of chance while other people were storming the Reichstag was not altogether living up to the historical possibilities of his age. In order for art to assert itself as radical, it needed to take political sides in this atmosphere. 1918 brought the end of the German monarchy and a republic was proclaimed in the city of Weimar. Between the assaults of the left and the right, the Weimar Republic lasted 15 years until Hitler finally snuffed it out. The man who made this collage had been in the trenches. His name was Max Ernst. The image is called the murdering aeroplane, half machine, half angel, half aggression, and half, what would you say those arms suggest? Modesty? I don't know of another work of art that speaks so powerfully to me of the strangeness of the machine, its alien character. Collage, for Ernst, was a way of rupturing one's grasp of the world. He didn't make any overtly political statements, but his work pointed to a way of making them by cutting out immediate pieces of reality and sticking them on a page. The best political collagist among the Dadaists was a woman named Hannah Höch, whose acrid little images from the 20s are Weimar. She was never sentimental, never a party tub-thumper, and being a woman, she has regularly been written off as a minor artist. That she was not, and for a vision of a world that was at the same time clear, estranged, bleakly funny, and poisoned at the root, nobody could touch her.
Ja, das Meer ist blau, so blau, das geht alles seinen Gang. Und wenn die Chose aus ist, fängt's nicht von vorne an. Ja, das Meer ist blau, so blau, und es geht auch nicht mehr lang. Ja, das Meer ist blau, so blau. Ja, das Meer ist blau, so blau. Ja, das Meer ist blau, so blau. Das Meer ist blau.
Certain images haunted German Dadaism and were its obsessive emblems. One was the war cripples who were on every street corner. This was the body reformed by politics, half human, half machine, prosthetic man, painted here by Otto Dix, who had been through the trenches and never forgot it. This to him was the very essence of the Weimar Republic. With his mechanical parts, the cripple was brother to the tailor's dummies that the Dadaists had seen in the Italian artist who also inspired surrealism, Giorgio di Chirico. Raoul Haussmann took a wooden dummy head and turned it into one of the great images of modern alienation. The spirit of our time, he called it. Mechanical man, complete with a tape measure for making judgments, a simpering industrial statistic. But the master of radical sourness in Berlin was George Gross. One of his friends called him a Bolshevik in painting, nauseated by painting. Actually, it was not painting, but Germany that made him sick. This one is called Republican automatons. One cripple waves a German flag, and the other responds with a cheer from his empty head. As with politics, so with love. Weimar man, in Gross's view, has no real passions, but the system has programmed him with certain desires so that he will consume well. And thus the dummy's mechanical bride was the whore. Gross drew prostitutes with a degree of moral vindictiveness that hadn't been seen in art since the late Middle Ages. To him, the whore was the Giftmädchen, the poison maiden of German folklore, the bringer of syphilis and ruin. His theatre of capitalism was as clear and memorable as an old morality play. In it, everybody and everything is for sale. All human transactions, except the solidarity of workers as a class, are poisoned. The world is owned by four breeds of pig: the capitalist, the officer, the priest, and the hooker, whose other form is the society wife, since in the end Gross didn't see much difference between the two. It's no use objecting that there were some kindly officers, cultivated bankers, and decent women in Berlin, as pointless as telling Daumier that there were honest lawyers in France. The rage and the pain of the images simply ignores that. Gross was one of the hanging judges of art, and his verdicts echo, whether you like them or not, in every German street and cafe and beer hall, now as then. Even though the 20s have gone, and with them the shared idea that the art of opposition could have a real influence upon political events, German Dada still remains one of the moral examples of our century.